Well, good morning, Gospel Life Church. Welcome to this week's devotional. A couple things for this week. You'll notice in the newsletter that we're going to have a new section in there with the weekly prayer guide. Uh, some of you know that we had the leadership retreat this past week. And one of the things that we talked about is really how we make sure that we're continuing to promote a culture of prayer within the body. And one of the ways that we can be doing that is we can take the prayer guide that Jeff Aronson creates on a weekly basis and that they use in prayer meeting and make sure that's available to everybody within the body in advance, and make sure that we can be looking at it, reading it, praying through that, and then joining in prayer meeting on Sunday mornings. So one of the things that you'll see in the newsletter will be a link to all the prayer guides, and they'll all be up there. In case you miss a week, the link will take you to all of the prayer guides. But the purpose of that prayer guide is really to pray the Word. It looks a little bit more like a devotional than it does maybe what you might be used to in a typical prayer requests list or something like that in a time of prayer. But that's intentional, to be praying the Word. So what I want to do is I just want to take the passage from this week's prayer guide and read through that, and then I won't steal everything from the prayer guide. I'll let you be able to use that first one yourself. But I did just want to point out a few things from the passage that's incorporated in the prayer guide today. So I'm going to read John 14, verses 5 through 7. Just a little context here. It's Jesus with the disciples, leading up to when he's going to be arrested and then killed. So he's preparing them right now for time without him, and he's focused on some very important and key things that we all should know as believers or as disciples of Jesus Christ. So in verse 5, chapter 14 of John, Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way?" Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would also know my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him." So a few simple verses with a lot in them. Familiar verses, most likely to all of us, but I want to point out a few things. Thomas's question to start with. We don't know where you're going. How will we know the way? Pretty basic question, maybe a question that you've had before, or you had before you became a believer and you started to understand the truth of Christ. And Jesus answers this quite simply, but there's a lot to his answer here. And that's what I want to focus on for the next couple of minutes here. So Jesus says, "I am the way." So we don't use this terminology as much today, although if you're a fan of the Mandalorian TV show, it is referenced there as the way, in a similar manner, a similar parallel as the path. In the Jewish audience, the Jewish listeners' standpoint right now, they would view the way as the commandments or the teachings of God. So Jesus is the way. He also said he's the truth. He doesn't say that he's a truth, as in one of many. He is the truth. We see the exclusivity of each of these statements as we go down through. And then finally, the life. Both the life right now, before death, and the life after death. Sometimes I think we miss this fact that Jesus is our life now, or we miss the eternal side because we're consumed with the life now. So Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And it's very exclusive, like I mentioned. No one comes to the Father outside of Christ. This intolerant message is true. It's straight from Jesus's mouth. There is only one way. He also points out at the end of the section of verses here that if you know Jesus, you'll know the Father. And it may sound very simple, but if we want to know God, we need to look more at Jesus. I think we miss that sometimes. We get caught up in thinking that a Christian writer or preacher or something like that might show us the way to God. Well, they can, but they better be focused on looking at Jesus and what Jesus said, what we learn about Jesus to help us focus on God. It's interesting as you continue on in this passage, you have Philip. He hears the same thing that we just hear here, and he questions. He doesn't get it, and I think that sometimes can be our response too. That we have to make sure we get these simple yet complex truths, and have that figured out. So Jesus, takes some more time and he elaborates later on in this passage. So I just want to encourage you with those few verses today. I want to encourage you to click on the link in the newsletter to make sure that you can look a little bit further. What Jeff does in the prayer guides is he focuses his questions and his comments around the pillars of Gospel Life Church. So how are we grounded in the gospel based off this passage? How are we growing in the gospel? And how are we going based off of this passage? So hope you get a lot of benefit out of those. Thanks.